The feud is the lifeblood of all of professional wrestling. Because if you don't have a feud, then you don't have a reason as to why these two guys or why these two girls are going at each other's throats for sometimes more than 30 minutes. And if you don't have a reason, then the fan has no reason to care. And if you don't have a reason to care, then wrestling stops being cool. Because it's cool to have 5-star matches that will absolutely melt your face, but at the end of the day, what you'll remember, what you will resonate with is the story and the feud behind that match. So today we're going to be looking at some of the best feuds out there. In fact, we're going to be looking at the best feud from every year for the past 20 years. So we're going to go year by year from 2002 all the way up to 2023 and determine what was the best feud from every single individual year. And hey, as always, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, ring that bell for notifications. If you're a wrestling fan, I'm confident that you're going to fall in love with this YouTube channel because we upload daily wrestling content. We do not miss days here. Before we move on, I just wanted to thank all of my Patreons over at patreon.com who have been supporting me and helping keep the lights on and the mics on. If you're looking for additional wrestling content, more than the daily content that I provide you here, go on over to patreon.com/SantiZap, where you're going to find a flurry of extra wrestling content that I think you're really going to like. All right, let's jump into things. Let's start things off with the year 2002, the year that many of you already know if you've watched all of my videos that I upload daily. This is the year that I started watching professional wrestling on a hardcore weekly basis. And without a single shadow of a doubt, the biggest feud in all of 2002 was none other than Triple H versus a returning Shawn Michaels, who had returned from a 4-year mini retirement due to a major back injury. And this feud just worked and made sense because it was just such a natural story. It is the story of two best friends turned bitter enemies. They turned bitter enemies because Triple H was jealous and upset that Shawn Michaels had come back from that injury to potentially steal the top spotlight that he had worked so hard to win over those 4 years that Shawn Michaels had been retired. So seeing him come back, garnering those cheers, winning those fans just made Triple H go crazy, and that craziness led to several fantastic, hard-hitting, brutal matches between Triple H and Shawn Michaels, matches that frankly Shawn Michaels had no business being in because he had just come back from career-threatening injuries. And yet he had the matches and they were fantastic. If anything, this feud probably went a little bit too long because it went past 2002 and they had a ton of matches. But in 2002, this was fresh, this was new, and this is iconic. The year is 2003, and 2003 is dominated by none other than Brock Lesnar versus Kurt Angle. They would have matches at WrestleMania. They would have an amazing Iron Man match on SmackDown, SummerSlam, and every time they had a match, it was just magic in the ring. These two had a level of chemistry that I don't think I've ever seen again between two technical professional wrestlers of this caliber. The story between the two just worked. It was just a story of who is the better of the two, Brock Lesnar or Kurt Angle. What was neat about this feud is they would constantly trade and go back and forth between who was the good guy and who was the heel, and both of them were good at playing both sides of the coin, so it always made you kind of guess as to who you should be even rooting for in the first place. This feud is fantastic. 2004 could have gone a couple of ways. There is no one feud that truly stands out amongst them, but my personal favorite feud from 2004 is none other than the legend killer Randy Orton taking on Cactus Jack Mick Foley. This is the feud that many say made Randy Orton. This was the birth of the legend killer. This was the birth of the man Randy Orton, because he was a boy and Mick Foley liked to play with boys. I'm not going to quote the whole Kurt Angle meme promo, but anyway, they had fantastic matches. They even had a tag team match at WrestleMania, an amazingly brutal hardcore match at Backlash, a hardcore match that, again, many credit to catapulting Randy Orton to the top of the card afterwards. 2005 is a funky year, and I decided to go with a funky feud, that being Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero, a feud that had a match at Judgment Day, as you're seeing here, a match at WrestleMania, an amazing match at WrestleMania, and of course, who could forget the SummerSlam ladder match for the custody of Dirty Dominic Mysterio. And yeah, all of the matches were fantastic. Did the storyline get a little bit kooky, a little bit wacky, and a little bit crazy towards the end? Yes, but hey, welcome to the world of professional wrestling, baby. 2006 was an easy runaway. It's not even close. It is John Cena and Edge. They would go back and forth basically for the entirety of the year in so many matches, and all of the matches had major stakes like the WWE Championship. So yeah, I don't have that much to say about it because everything has been chronicled about how not only is this a great feud, but this is the ruthless aggression era feud that really defined that entire generation. And these two would go on to war with one another for years after this. And this is the feud that both of them look back on as the feud that made one another their biggest nemesis. 2007 was a tough one. There were a lot of like middling feuds. There was no feud that again stands out as an all-timer, but I'm going to give this one purely because of the quality of the matches, and it did tell a pretty decent story. To The Undertaker versus Batista, they would go on to have a great, highly underrated WrestleMania main event match. This match is fantastic and does not get talked about enough. It would go all the way through to Survivor Series, where they would even have a Hell in a Cell match. Every single time these guys got in the ring together, they just made magic. And sometimes, you don't need high flyers, amazing technical wrestlers. Sometimes you just need two big, beefy, meaty dudes slapping meat, baby. 2008 is the year where I took a hiatus from professional wrestling, and I barely watched any wrestling, but from the wrestling that I've gone back to watch and from what I'm able to gather online in my own personal research, I can see that for me, my personal favorite and the general consensus of 2008 is that it's not even close. It's Shawn Michaels versus I am the best in the world at what I do, Chris Jericho, baby. The reason this feud is so fantastic is because they would go on to have countless fantastic matches, but it was just such a personal feud. A feud where Jericho was the bad guy, but weirdly at the start of the feud, I feel like he was the good guy. He was the one who was wronged, and Shawn Michaels was just the de facto good guy. But in my opinion, Chris Jericho was in the right. This feud made you question a lot of things about morality as a wrestling fan, which is so cool and so unique when you compare to the other feuds that we've looked at here, because most of them really just rely on the back of really, really great matches. But these two, the matches aside, because the matches were fantastic, in my opinion, the matches took a back seat to their fantastic promo segments. This is a feud that I think is in contention for best feud of the entire decade of the 2000s. 2009 has low-key one of my favorite feuds of all time because it was by two unsung heroes that generally just were not getting enough love by the WWE top brass, but were generally beloved by WWE fans, and that was the feud between Jeff Hardy and CM Punk. Now, I was never the biggest Jeff Hardy fan, but I was a pretty big CM Punk fan, so this was one of the feuds where I was very much on the side of the bad guy, but my God, the bad guy in this one was like a hilariously evil movie villain bad guy in CM Punk, as he basically just mocked and paraded Jeff Hardy's demons with drugs and alcohol in front of him in a manner that ultimately he ended up winning in as he took the World Heavyweight Championship from him. This is a fantastic feud where the highlight is definitely their TLC match at SummerSlam, but there are more than just that one singular car crash of a match. This has great matches. It tells a great story. This is prime evil dastardly CM Punk and a Jeff Hardy that is very lovable and very likable. 2010, I think that this is overrated, but ultimately 2010 was a pretty weak year in my opinion for wrestling as a whole, and I had to give this to the Nexus versus, I know I have John Cena here, but really it seems like it's like all of WWE, but John Cena really is the one that represents the WWE as a whole, especially at this time. Like John Cena Cena was the WWE's poster child, so the Nexus attacking John Cena was really a representation of the Nexus invading and attacking the WWE. But I thought that this feud I don't think is as good as people look back on it. I think most of the matches are fairly weak and fairly mediocre. This is some of John Cena's least inspiring work that he's done in his entire career. It's very simple movesets, very formulaic, and the guys that are in the Nexus, most of them don't have that much experience, with the exception of the likes of Wade Barrett and Bryan Danielson in the group. Like, yeah, cool. There was the big moment in the SummerSlam match between Team Nexus, Team WWE, and yes, that is a match that everyone, including myself, believed that Nexus should have won. But I ultimately just don't think that this is a great year for feuds. But this is the best feud. But I do think it's an overrated feud. 2011, I don't think that this is overrated at all. I gotta give this, and it's not even close, to the Summer of Punk feud between CM Punk and John Cena. That Money in the Bank match alone is one of my favorite matches of all time. This feud is fantastic. They would also go on to have a great match at SummerSlam, a match that in my opinion wasn't as good as their Money in the Bank match, but it's still a great match in its own regard, even if it was a little bit overbooked with Triple H being the special guest referee and then a cash-in from Alberto Del Rio. But overall, this feud to me revitalized wrestling, because 2010 was just the doldrums of professional wrestling in my opinion, and this saved wrestling for me. 2012, I'm a basic bitch, so I went with John Cena and The Rock. Look, these are my 1 and 2 of professional wrestling. A lot of people, especially on my live stream, twitch.tv/SantiZap, always ask me, Santi, what is your dream match that you wish could happen? And I always answer, my dream match happened. I'm lucky that my dream match exists, because my dream match for forever and always has always been John Cena versus The Rock, and I was lucky enough to not just get it once in a lifetime and twice in a lifetime. Plus, this poster just speaks, right? Like when you see this poster, it makes sound. You know that when you look at this, you hear voices in the air. I hear them loud and clear, telling me to listen. Yeah, I know, I'm the songbird of our generation. 2013, I cheated. And I cheated just so that I could put this feud in. But I put in CM Punk versus Paul Heyman. And I cheated because the real answer for me is Daniel Bryan versus The Authority. But a good chunk of Daniel Bryan versus The Authority happened also in 2014. So I put it there just so that I could have CM Punk versus Paul Heyman, which was a fantastic feud of amazing promos. Well, it's a feud pretty much entirely of promos, because of course Paul Heyman is not a professional wrestler, but what Paul Heyman has is lackeys like Curtis Axel, like Ryback, and of course his final boss, Brock Lesnar, which had a match with CM Punk at that year's SummerSlam. But like I said, 2013 probably should go to Daniel Bryan versus The Authority. But like I mentioned, in 2014, a good chunk of Daniel Bryan versus The Authority exists in the early portions of 2014, going from the Royal Rumble into WrestleMania of that year. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to put this in 2014 so that I can sneak in CM Punk versus Paul Heyman in the previous year. But yeah, of course, WrestleMania. Daniel Bryan's rise against The Authority is iconic, legendary, and it was like such an organic, natural, fan-driven feud. It was so good. It's a once in a generation type of feud that is very not very hard. It is impossible to replicate the moment in time that was the Yes Movement. 2015, there were a few options, and you might think I'm crazy here, but I couldn't not give this to Undertaker versus Brock Lesnar. Yes, at the previous year's WrestleMania, they had a fairly weak match where Brock Lesnar broke the streak. But Undertaker came back revitalized this year and had a hell of a set of great matches with Brock Lesnar. A great SummerSlam match, a great Hell in a Cell match where they tore the ring apart. It was violent, it was brutal. You could tell that there was a level of respect but animosity between these guys, that an animosity animosity that can only be held and unleashed in a place like a SummerSlam or a Hell in a Cell. This feud is, in my opinion, highly underrated and easily Undertaker's best work of his post-streak career. 2016, like I said earlier, I'm a bit of a basic bitch, so I don't overthink things. John Cena versus AJ Styles. I know that the Royal Rumble match technically takes place in 2017, but they had a set of great matches in 2016 as well. And really, that Royal Rumble match is built off the back of the feud that these two had between one another in 2016. This is one of my favorite feuds of all time, and it delivers some of my favorite matches of all time. And it delivers, in my opinion, unequivocally, John Cena's best matches of his illustrious greatest of all time career. Just goes to show you just how incredibly talented AJ Styles was, where he could just go from TNA, New Japan, and turn on the WWE style and have fantastic 6-star matches with the most WWE guy that there is in John Cena. 2017, this is one of my favorites. I have a soft spot for Kevin Owens versus Chris Jericho, a feud that was beautiful and evil at the same time. These two were best of friends, and ultimately, through a series of misunderstandings and jealousy and betrayals, ultimately led to these two breaking up in one of the most iconic Monday Night Raw segments, the Festival of Friendship. The one downside is that it seemed that everyone loved this feud except the WWE, because this feud should have culminated with a Universal Championship match at that upcoming WrestleMania, but unfortunately they decided to take the title off of Kevin Owens just before WrestleMania and gave it to Goldberg, and instead gave him the US title, and they would go on to have a match for the US title, and it did fall flat. The match fell flat, but the feud still lingers. The feud was heartbreaking. The feud was fantastic. 2018, I'm giving you a curveball. I've been trying to avoid NXT, but I couldn't avoid NXT any longer because it includes arguably the greatest feud in NXT history, that being Tommaso Ciampa versus Johnny Gargano, who would go on to feud for years, not just 2018, but this was really like the apex of their feud. Their matches were technically beautiful while also being brutal car crashes as well. And the story, it was just amazing. Best friends that turned their backs on one another. Well, I should say Tommaso Ciampa first turned his back on Johnny Gargano. Best friends that made their way through the rings of NXT to become main eventers in NXT, starting out as nobodies in the Cruiserweight Classic, making a name for themselves in the tag team division in DIY, and all of those years of love and adoration for one another being tossed out the window in 2018 with one of the most heartbreaking heel turns that I've ever seen. This feud is an all-timer in the WWE and easily the best feud of that year, even if it was NXT. 2019 could have gone to a couple, but the feud between Kofi Kingston and Daniel Bryan to me is just so special. You can actually even make the argument that this is Kofi Kingston versus Vince McMahon a little bit, because it was Vince McMahon that kept holding down Kofi Kingston because he just didn't see him as a main event player. Funnily enough, it's the same story that Daniel Bryan was trying to overcome the authority, trying to demonstrate that he is a main event player, and them holding him down because they only saw him as a B+ player. So it was like a role reversal between Daniel Bryan and Kofi Kingston. These two are just magnificent storytellers. Their chemistry was off the chart, and it was far and away my favorite match of this entire year, their match at WrestleMania. 2020, you can make the argument that really the top feud and the top story of this year was the WWE versus the pandemic, but I'm not going to do a cop-out answer like that. I'm going to give you a real feud. I'll go with Edge versus Randy Orton, who would go on to have a hellacious last man standing match at that year's WrestleMania in front of no one, sadly. They would go on to have a great match that they themselves titled the greatest wrestling match of all time. It wasn't. It was still a good match, but don't get me wrong, it was not the greatest wrestling match of all time. but the feud was so real. It's so personal, and it's two of the GOATs. It's two of the people that represent the rise and growth through the Ruthless Aggression era to where they would be at that point, which is two legends of the business. This is a fantastic feud with a great story, with great matches, with great promos all throughout, and it just felt real. It just felt like these two genuinely hated each other. This is a great feud. 2021, I'm telling you, he was still cooking. Look at all the years that we lost because of that injury. What could have been, because he would come back and have amazing feuds, this time with Seth Rollins. Edge and Seth Rollins had a fantastic feud, a feud that revolved around Seth Rollins costing Edge championships, a great match at SummerSlam, a great Hell in a Cell match at that year's Crown Jewel, and their chemistry was just off the charts. And this is an Edge that had a lot of an edge, I guess you could say. He would get violent, he would get nasty, he would get brutal. This was the Edge that would use those steel chair legs to apply force on that crippler crossface. This is an Edge that was out for blood, and this is a Seth Rollins that was playing some of the best psychological mind games of his entire career. 2022 just happened last year, so it's still fairly recent in our memories, and I had to give this to the fantastic trilogy between Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins, a trilogy that culminated in a fantastic Hell in a Cell match where Cody Rhodes would go on to have that match with a torn pec, a nasty, gruesome injury where we would have 100%, one, excused him if he didn't want to have the match. Two, if he did have the match, we would have been okay with it being a 5-minute squash match. What we weren't expecting was a 5-minute epic, excuse me, not 5 minutes, sorry, 30-minute epic between Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins, and they would go on to have 3 epic matches. Of course, one of those matches being the debut of Cody Rhodes at that year's WrestleMania, a match that didn't have a story or a feud to it, but they would go on to build a great storyline and a great feud on the back of that initial WrestleMania match. And last but not least, we have 2023, a year that's not over yet, so it's very possible that I might change my mind, but I gotta be honest with you, I don't think I'll change my mind, because I don't see how any feud can possibly top Roman Reigns versus Sami Zayn. Yes, it was all at the start of 2023, starting with, of course, the betrayal at the Royal Rumble, the trial of Sami Zayn, the great match that they would have at Elimination Chamber, and then beyond that, it stopped being really Sami Zayn versus Roman Reigns. It really became Sami Zayn versus the Bloodline. So I think maybe I should be saying Sami Zayn versus the Bloodline ultimately, because yeah, even after the match with Roman Reigns, the feud would still really continue, but really against the Usos instead of Roman Reigns. But this entire era of the Bloodline storyline will never, ever be topped. This is peak Bloodline storytelling. This is fantastic, magnifique, and that's it. Excuse me, holy smokes. Okay, I'm done. Get out of here.